Let's see what Test UFO looks like. Okay, that actually looks really good. Today we're reviewing the first 1000Hz refresh rate gaming monitor that we've tested. It's the brand new LG UltraGear 25G590B. A brand new 24.5 inch size screen aimed at competitive and esports gamers. We first saw a load of 1000Hz plus monitors announced at CES in January, but what makes this new LG model different and a lot better than the others that were announced earlier this year is that it delivers this 1000Hz refresh rate at a native Full HD 1080p resolution, instead of only offering 1000Hz when using a dual mode function at a lowly 720p resolution. You don't have to sacrifice resolution here to reach 1000Hz. It's also a smaller 24.5 inch size screen instead of those other 27 inch models, and both of these factors immediately make it a more interesting option for most competitive gamers, where small format 1080p is still a very popular and widely used combination. We'll talk more about use cases and target markets more later. All of these new 1000Hz and above monitors announced so far are LCDs, not OLED but LCD, with the vast majority using IPS technology panels. I'm not going to lie, ever since those first 1000Hz capable monitors were announced in January, I've been concerned about the potential for any LCD monitor panel to reliably keep up with these kind of super high frame rates, let alone an IPS LCD panel. And when we saw the recent review over at Monitors Unboxed of the new 27 inch Philips model, which offered 1000Hz in its dual mode 720p mode, and saw just how poorly that performed, I feared the worst really. Is 1000Hz just a marketing trick? Are these screens all going to be a terrible blurry mess in real use? Can an IPS LCD panel really support anywhere near this kind of refresh rate? I consider myself very skeptical about performance going into this review, but let's see how this new LG model performs. So we'll get right into the gaming performance testing first of all. And to do that, we'll combine a wide range of tests, including panel response time measurements, as well as considering overshoot, refresh rate compliance, real-world gaming testing, and various repeatable motion clarity test approaches, including the familiar and famous Test UFO benchmark at blurbusters.com. Let's start with Test UFO, and at 1000Hz the results were very good actually. This is one of the first tests that I ran on the monitor when I unboxed it. Curious to see whether it was going to be a blurry mess, but I was really pleasantly surprised to see that motion clarity was actually very good. Consider me impressed. LG have even worked with Blurbusters to come up with an offline version of the Test UFO so that it runs more stably at 1000 FPS. The web-based version can have some challenges depending on your system, so this special offline edition is what we've used for the testing in this review, and it's great for handling high refresh rate screens of 1000Hz or more. Here's some pursuit camera photos of each of the overdrive modes at the native maximum 1000Hz and using the standard 960 pixels per second scroll speed of Test UFO. The image looked super sharp and clear, and even the small text sections became much clearer and more readable. There were very small differences between the 4 overdrive modes at this refresh rate, and it was incredibly hard really to notice any visual difference with the naked eye, to be honest, at this refresh rate. We can also compare the 1000Hz performance against various other refresh rates, and you can see the improvements in motion clarity that the higher refresh rate delivers. Many of the best gaming IPS LCD monitors reach up to around 360Hz or so maximum, and there are significant and noticeable improvements in motion clarity when you push beyond that, as you can see here. For OLED monitors, if you want at least 1080p resolution, then the fastest panels currently available reach up to 540Hz, and compared to those, you can see that the LG's 1000Hz refresh rate also performs very well here overall. It's got better motion clarity than the common 240Hz and 360Hz OLEDs as well in these comparisons, although 540Hz OLED starts to offer clearer and cleaner motion clarity. These tests so far are at the standard and traditional 960 pixels per second scroll speed of Test UFO, but what about for even faster motion situations? For this, we doubled the scroll speed of Test UFO to 1920 pixels per second, a useful simulation to more thoroughly identify differences at these kind of super high refresh rates, and more representative potentially of some of the fastest gaming situations that this screen is likely to be used for. At these kind of scroll speeds, more motion blur is visible, which is to be expected, with much faster moving content moving across the screen that you're trying to track. Motion clarity generally improves still as refresh rate increases, with smaller elements especially being easier to see. At these faster scroll speeds and at the higher refresh rate range, you do start to get more smearing behind the moving UFO, which is caused by the panel response times not being sufficient to keep up with the frame rate and an inherent liquid crystal response limitation of LCD panels in general, regardless of the refresh rate. This wasn't really visible at the normal slower scroll speeds of Test UFO, but it starts to become more noticeable now with the much faster panning motion. While the moving image is a bit sharper and clearer at 1000Hz, including the small text elements, the 500Hz example shows less smearing as the response times are keeping up better with the frame rate there. Let's break off for a moment there and look at the measured response times. LG offer 4 levels of overdrive control in the on-screen menu: off, normal, fast and faster. At the native 1000Hz refresh rate, there's very little difference in pixel transition times between the off and the normal modes, neither showing any overshoot, which was great. Moving up to the fast mode didn't really change much either, but the faster mode showed a reasonable improvement in grey to grey speeds, down to 2.4 milliseconds grey to grey average, although we started to get a bit of overshoot creeping into the measurements, although this was not visible really in any real-world motion tests and content. We'll talk more about overshoot considerations in a moment. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have probably already spotted the key issue though with pixel response times, and that is that they're not fast enough to reliably keep up with the 1000Hz refresh rate even in the maximum faster mode, although they do fare better in this mode than the others. This is what we were concerned about when these screens were announced, whether the response times could ever be fast enough, but unfortunately they're not. We were right to be concerned about that element. To truly keep up with the 1000Hz, they'd need to be reliably reaching under 1 milliseconds grey to grey, and while performance is very good here for an IPS LCD panel, they can't reach that fast. It's that pretty limited refresh rate compliance at the top end which leads to that additional smearing that we saw in the pursuit camera photos at the high scroll speeds, which would otherwise be less if pixel transitions were keeping up better, although as we say that's probably unrealistic to expect on any LCD panel. However, we can't base judgment purely on pixel response times and refresh rate compliance. That smearing is not really there in many motion situations at all. It's only in the fastest panning motions where you'd start to see that, we think. At more modest scroll speeds, it's far less visible as our pursuit photos captured. The smearing is also offset by the improved motion clarity that the eye sees thanks to the higher refresh rate, while smearing increases at the top end of the refresh rate range due to where response times struggle to keep up, the actual image looks sharper and clearer still. Obviously, we'd ideally want consistent sub 1 millisecond response times here, but that's not going to be realistic, we think, on any LCD panel. You're really going to need OLED for that. At lower refresh rates and during VRR situations where the frame rate drops, in the maximum faster mode, the grey to grey speeds actually speed up a bit, but at the same time, the overshoot gets increasingly worse. This screen does not use variable overdrive, unfortunately, which is a feature that could otherwise slow down the grey to grey speeds as the frame rate gets lower in order to control that overshoot. But that's quite rarely implemented, or at least well implemented, outside of native G-Sync scaler screens. Looking at these measurements in isolation, you might think that at 500Hz the overshoot would be really bad, but actually in practice, visually it's still subjectively good. In fact, even at 1000Hz you might think you'd see some overshoot, like for instance the transition from 0 to 150 here, from black to mid-grey in this example, but in practice the frame rate has an influence on visible overshoot as well, as although the amplitude or the height of the overshoot is quite high, its duration is very short before a new frame is sent to the screen, therefore masking the visible artifacts in many situations. It's the same at other high refresh rates like 500Hz. The overshoot value and amplitude may be high, but it doesn't stay on the screen for very long at all, and so it's very hard to see in real use. In practice, we felt that the faster mode was usable down to around 400 FPS in VRR situations before overshoot then became too noticeable and distracting. That's still a very large 600 FPS total frame rate variation range in which you could potentially play with VRR before overshoot really became any kind of issue in this mode. And it's the fastest mode for handling the upper refresh rate range. TN film LCD panels may fare better when it comes to response times. We'll have to wait and see when future 1000Hz TN film gaming monitors are released. But those panels aren't without their trade-offs, of course, in other areas like image quality and viewing angles. Really, OLED is definitely better suited to consistently delivering sub 1 millisecond response times at 1000Hz. But we do think that LG have done a good job here with the IPS panel, and we were surprised at the performance, to be honest. As we showed earlier, the motion clarity remains excellent in many situations, despite the poor refresh rate compliance at the highest refresh rates. It's only the really fast moving content where the smearing starts to become more noticeable, we thought. There's a relationship here between panel response times and perceived motion clarity, but it's not quite as simple as considering only the refresh rate compliance number. It's useful, but it doesn't tell the whole story. The fast response time mode is the next step down, delivering slightly slower grey to grey speeds, but with less overshoot. We felt that this mode was usable down to around 200 FPS before overshoot then became a problem, and this gave us an even wider 800 FPS VRR range in which to play for gaming. If you really needed to avoid overshoot for the entire VRR range from 1000Hz all the way down to the lowest 48 FPS supported, then the normal response time mode can offer you that. It's very close to the fast mode really, just without the overshoot problems at lower frame rates. It is slower than the maximum faster mode for the top end of the refresh rate range and for the 1000Hz gaming situation, but visually, in practice, it was very hard to see a difference, to be honest. We're talking minor differences here in response times, and only the super sensitive are likely to spot the differences. So with that in mind, the normal mode can offer you a single overdrive mode experience across the entire huge VRR range, and it's also optimal for lower refresh rate devices like games consoles or external media devices. If you're a competitive gamer playing at the highest frame rates possible and reaching 400 FPS or more reliably, there's some additional small incremental benefits in pushing up to the maximum faster mode, and that offers the optimal performance for the highest frame rate situations. How does this panel compare with other high refresh rate gaming options? If we lower the refresh rate down to 360Hz for a like-for-like comparison, the motion clarity performance was very comparable to the ASUS G-Sync Pulsar monitor that we tested recently when Pulsar was disabled, and so the underlying panel here is certainly very good for an IPS LCD. Pixel response times are slightly better optimized on the Pulsar screen thanks to the G-Sync scaler, but they're pretty close overall. The point here is that this is a very fast IPS LCD panel, right up there with the best that we previously tested at comparable refresh rates. We've already discussed how motion clarity improves further then as you push beyond 360Hz as well. The LG model has a blur reduction mode as well, by the way. It's not G-Sync Pulsar, but it's an interesting MBR Pro mode, which we'll explore and compare a little bit later. Compared with the 1000Hz capable Philips display that Monitors Unboxed recently reviewed, the LG looks a lot better, with much less smearing and overshoot visible. That pale overshoot on the Philips model is especially distracting in fact, and that's not present here on the LG. The improved motion clarity performance is combined with the far more usable and enjoyable 1080p resolution instead of 720p as well, and you get more detailed and sharper images as a result, rather than having to sacrifice resolution in order to reach that 1000Hz. We already provided some motion clarity comparisons at the standard scroll speed against OLED monitors of varying refresh rates earlier. At these much faster scroll speeds, this is where the near instant response times of OLED technology make a noticeable difference, delivering a cleaner and clearer overall image without the smearing that you see on the 1000Hz LCD. If you're only interested in motion clarity and not necessarily the other aspects of gaming experience that we're going to discuss in a moment, then you'd probably be better off with an OLED, although currently there's no OLED monitors of this size and resolution available to buy. Although one upcoming option from ASUS was recently announced at Computex, so there will be potential options later in the year. Motion clarity is very important for gamers, but it's not the only factor in the gaming performance equation. Another less talked about benefit of higher refresh rates is with the stroboscopic effect, which can be significantly reduced with higher refresh rates. This effect can be seen as you focus on a single area of the display and objects then move past your line of sight. So for instance, this might happen if you're focused on a crosshair or target area in a fast FPS game, like CSGO for instance, while the scenery around you shifts past your line of sight. The motion clarity photos earlier were about how objects appear as they move across the screen and you track them moving. This other consideration is more about how you can help avoid noticeable stepping and strobing of the image that can affect some users in certain gaming situations. To demonstrate this, we've used a mouse cursor animation at blurbusters.com. Taking a fixed position photo captures how this appears to the naked eye. The test simulates a scroll at a range of refresh rates. The higher refresh rates on offer here can help reduce this stepping significantly, helping content feel smoother and reducing potential stuttering and strobing that you may experience. Not everybody experiences these issues, but the super high refresh rate certainly helps those who do, and there's big benefits on offer here from the 1000Hz panel. This results in a smoother looking image overall. If you're able to actually drive frame rates up to near 1000 FPS, you can also benefit from the higher frame rates and improved end-to-end latency that this offers, including reduction in the scan-out time, which basically gets shorter the higher your frame rate goes. More frames being rendered leads to smoother motion on screen and reduced end-to-end system latency, which could give you an advantage in competitive situations. We're talking milliseconds here again, but for professional and competitive gaming, these things all add up and they're important. The whole experience feels smoother and snappier as the refresh rate increases. All of these benefits in motion clarity and the stroboscopic effect that we've just talked about only really apply though if you can push your frame rates up to the upper limits of 1000Hz. Otherwise, if you can only power something like 240 FPS, you're only going to see the equivalent performance of a 240 FPS monitor, which might then beg the question whether you can save some money and get a lower refresh rate model. Let's talk more about use cases and target markets then. There's a clear target audience for this new screen, and at 24.5 inches in size, it's really aimed at those professional and esports gamers who still prefer a small screen size to focus on during very competitive gaming situations. The smaller size has a narrower field of view, which maximizes focus, and it requires less head and eye movement as you game. You can see the full map and UI at a glance, and it's been standardized now really as the format for tournament play. Most of the monitor market is shifted to larger screen sizes, but 24 inches and thereabouts is still very popular for these situations. The stand provides a very small footprint, which frees up loads of desktop space for your keyboard and mouse, including for large mouse pads, where you might need to make large arm movements during gaming. The stand adjustments also include useful positioning indicator labels for tilt, height and swivel, so you can ensure consistent and comfortable setup, which is customized to your individual preferences each time. Stand adjustments are all very smooth and easy to use as well, although there's a bit of a wobble from the screen as you move it around or when you use the screen menu buttons. Being a smaller screen size, it's also a more natural match for the 1920 by 1080 or 1080p resolution, a resolution that's going to be far easier to power than common 1440p or even 4K gaming screens that you will find on the market in the larger sizes already. That makes it easy to try and push up to the super high refresh rates available here, so you can take advantage of every little performance benefit that you can get, whether that's with the frame rate, motion clarity, stroboscopic effect, or overall system latency. The big questions for many gamers are going to be whether A, you're playing games which even support 1000Hz and above, B, whether your system is going to be able to render those kind of frame rates, and C, whether you're going to personally see the benefits or not. You're going to need an extremely powerful and well-optimized system for this, but there are some popular games like Valorant, Counter-Strike 2 and League of Legends, for example, which can reach over 1000 FPS. We're not going to spend ages talking about other system requirements and GPU performance. We're interested primarily here in the display performance, but hopefully, if you're even thinking of buying a screen of this type, you're aware of what you need from your games and your system to make it worthwhile. You'll need a very powerful system for every aspect of gaming performance. If you're only pushing 240 FPS, for example, or playing games which don't support higher frame rates, there's no benefit really in having a 1000Hz monitor. As for whether you will see and feel the benefits or not, that's something only you can really answer, but we think really it's only the super competitive and professional esports gamers who might see benefit in pushing to these extreme levels. And your more casual and average gamer will probably be just as well off with a standard mid-tier refresh rate, where they can instead then prioritise larger screen sizes, higher resolutions, and additional features and technologies. One additional note on system support is that the screen features one DisplayPort 2.1 with UHBR 20 speeds and two HDMI 2.1 connections. You can use DP 2.1 or HDMI 2.1 to reach the full spec of the screen at 10-bit color depth, thanks to the use of DSC. But if you've only got an older DP 1.4 graphics card, then at 1000Hz you'd be capped to 422 chroma, which will cause a drop in image quality, both at 10-bit and 8-bit color depth. If you've got something like an older RTX 30 or 40 series card, then you'd be better off using the HDMI 2.1 connection than the DP 1.4 connections that they have. But if you've got something newer, like an RTX 50 series card, you can use DP 2.1 as well. Any DP 2.1 capable graphics card should be sufficient regardless of the UHBR tier that it supports. But obviously for a screen like this, you want the fastest and best GPU that you can afford to go with it. To support the very high frame rate demands of 1000Hz, the screen supports adaptive sync for variable refresh rates, with two modes available in the menu, offering slightly different VRR ranges. Being an IPS LCD, we saw no issues with VRR flicker, even during our stress testing scenarios. Feature-wise, there's no dual mode support on the screen. That would be crazy low resolution given the native 1080p anyway. There is, however, an overclocking function that squeezes another 100Hz out of the screen and takes you up to 1100Hz. There's the usual range of gaming preset modes and useful settings like black stabilizer for adjusting visibility in darker games, an FPS frame rate counter, and a range of crosshair graphics for certain gaming situations. There's also LG's recently introduced AI scene optimization feature, which can intelligently switch between different preset modes if you want for different use cases. HDR capabilities are very limited on the screen, so we won't spend undue time talking about them here. There's no mini LED backlight, of course, only some basic edge-lit local dimming and HDR 400 certification. So HDR gaming is certainly a weakness of the screen, like it is on other 24-inch panels that are available on the market. If you're more interested in immersive and impressive HDR gaming, which, let's be frank, is not really a priority for the competitive and esports titles that this screen is really aimed at, you'd be better looking at something like an OLED monitor for sure. The overclocking mode can be enabled from the on-screen menu, and it gives you an extra 100Hz refresh rate room subject to compatibility with your system and GPU. This continues to function with VRR, but you cannot use the motion blur reduction mode with the overclocking function. If you try, it just reverts you back to the native 1000Hz operation. We'll test the motion blur reduction mode in a moment as well. You also don't seem to be able to disable VRR from the menu without it also disabling the overclock, but you can turn off VRR via your GPU if you wanted to for whatever reason. The response time performance was basically the same as 1000Hz with similar refresh rate compliance, so there was still some additional smearing in the fastest moving content as we demonstrated earlier. This mode could offer some further minor improvements in motion clarity, system latency and stroboscopic effects again, so could give you another small boost. Really, it feels like this mode was probably added after the original announcement of the screen. That was in May this year to compete with the range of 720p 1000Hz plus displays announced so far, which seem to have been competing with one another for the fastest spec on paper. We've seen examples of 1040Hz, 1080Hz, but here's LG offering 1100Hz instead via the overclock mode. As before, most normal gamers and users would never notice the difference, but in the super competitive and esports space, every little bit helps. Input lag is also incredibly low and basically nothing at the native refresh rate, and during VRR situations, it's slightly higher for fixed 60Hz input devices, but still low compared with a lot of screens. The Motion Blur Reduction Pro mode is available from the menu and operates a strobing blur reduction backlight for improving motion clarity in certain gaming situations. The MBR Pro mode setting is available at various fixed refresh rates, but it cannot be used at the same time as VRR. When you enable MBR from the menu, It automatically disables adaptive sync for you, so that makes it nice and easy. But this mode can be used then at all of the natively recognized refresh rate options from 120Hz up to 1000Hz, but it's not available at 60Hz due to excessive flickering. It's also not available when using the 1100Hz overclock mode. Once adaptive sync has been disabled, it's pretty quick to switch between the off and the on modes for this setting as well, but you'd need to manually then re-enable VRR if you want to use that again later. The brightness can be adjusted in MBR mode, but annoyingly this is not remembered independently between the off and the on states. The brightness remains pretty much consistent though between off and on modes, so you probably won't have to change this much anyway compared with your normal gaming configuration. Maximum brightness reaches 289 nits in this mode, which is decent for an LCD strobing, only being really surpassed by mini LED monitors, which have a much brighter backlight, and G-Sync Pulsar, which is optimized in this way. This should give you a decent brightness adjustment range if you want to use this mode at all. From a motion clarity point of view, there's only small improvements at the maximum 1000Hz, which is already very clear thanks to the super high refresh rate. At the standard 960 scroll speed of the UFO tests, there are some minor improvements in sharpness of the moving image as you track it across the screen. The improvements are more noticeable at the faster 1920 scroll speed, as it reduces some of the visible smearing a bit and it makes smaller elements sharper and clearer. Some people may want to use this mode at 1000Hz for squeezing a little bit more motion clarity out of the screen potentially. There are more visual benefits though when you use this mode at lower refresh rates, which don't have as good motion clarity natively because of the lower refresh rate. For example, here's the results at 500Hz, where there are more obvious improvements in motion clarity when using this mode, with the moving image becoming a lot sharper and clearer. Similar thing down at even lower refresh rates like 120Hz in these examples, and with support for that 120Hz mode, it also makes it a viable option for use with modern consoles as well, which is useful. If your game or system doesn't support the highest frame rates, or you're specifically gaming at a lower refresh rate for certain situations, this mode could be useful for improving motion clarity. An interesting comparison is against G-Sync Pulsar monitors, which we've tested recently, representing one of the best blur reduction technologies available on the market. For this, we lowered the refresh rate to 360Hz for a like-for-like comparison and compared motion clarity. The sharpness and clarity is very similar actually between the two models, although the LG shows more noticeable strobe crosstalk ghosting behind the moving image. That strobe crosstalk reduces noticeably as you increase the refresh rate though, becoming very hard to see at 1000Hz. For lower refresh rates like 360Hz, the strobe timing is not as well configured as G-Sync Pulsar's advanced backlight, which does an amazing job of eliminating that. It's still very good though here, and remember these pursuit camera photos are using the faster scroll speed in these tests. The strobe crosstalk is consistent across all areas of the screen, whether you're focusing on the top, the middle or the bottom areas. You don't have variation like you do with many blur reduction modes, and that's thanks to the use of a rolling scan backlight design. When it comes to console gaming, since the screen has a native 1080p resolution, that's the maximum input signal that it can accept from modern games consoles. It can support 120Hz at 1080p along with VRR, and it also allows you to use the motion blur reduction mode if you want at 120Hz. Note that a PlayStation 5 can still operate HDR mode at 1080p, but an Xbox Series X cannot, as that's only supported at 4K, although there's very limited HDR hardware capabilities on this screen anyway, so it's not a major gap. There's no speakers on this model, but there is a headphone connection if you need it for audio. Console gaming support is quite limited given the low resolution and small screen size. You'd probably be better with a larger, high resolution screen with proper HDR capabilities, like an OLED monitor for example, if console gaming is a priority. But you're hopefully not buying a 1000Hz gaming monitor anyway to only use it at 120Hz max for consoles anyway. Shadow detail was reasonable out of the box, offering basically the same performance for the darker shades near black in both the Gamer 1 native gamut mode and in the sRGB emulation mode. The first visible grayscale shade was RGB4, which was reasonable overall, and a typical performance really for an IPS panel with its limited native contrast ratio. That reaches around 1100 to 1 on this model. LG provide a useful black stabilizer setting in the menu which adjusts the luminance of darker shades near black. But importantly, this is done without raising the actual black point and crushing the contrast ratio as a result. The default setting is 50, but you can move it up to 100, which brings out further shadow detail and makes darker scenes brighter. This is one of those things to experiment with, but the setting gives you good flexibility and improvements for darker gaming situations. We've looked at the gaming performance extensively there, and we should also take a look at other performance areas and use cases too. The brightness adjustment range of the screen was very good, reaching up to around 400 nits maximum, which should accommodate those who like a brighter screen for gaming. And also being able to reach down to 59 nits at the lower end, which should be fine for use in darker room conditions. Contrast was typical for an IPS type panel at around 1100 to 1. Out of the box, the screen comes in the Gamer 1 preset mode, which offered very good gamma setup, very close to 2.2, with a slightly too cool grayscale weighted a little bit towards blue. There's a wide colour gamut on offer from the screen as well, supporting wide gamut content and offering more vivid and saturated colours for gaming that a lot of people like. A lot of high refresh rate LCD monitors have only a standard sRGB colour gamut sometimes, so the LG model can offer you a more colourful experience. We measured around 125% relative coverage of sRGB, but despite the over coverage, SDR colour accuracy remained reasonable even in this mode. The native colour space more closely matches the DCI-P3 reference, with around 95% absolute coverage, leaving us with reasonable colour accuracy out of the box for DCI-P3 wide gamut content as well. There's a wide range of preset modes for different gaming scenarios, which offer various alterations to sharpness, colour vividness and so on, but those who are looking for a more accurate mode for SDR content and general applications, LG also provide an sRGB mode in the menu. This mode has very similar gamma and grayscale to the Gamer 1 mode, with gamma being a little bit too high now, which was a little bit of a shame. You still have access though to adjust the brightness and contrast settings as well as the RGB channels, but you do lose access to the gamma and colour temperature modes. The main benefit of this mode is that it clamps the native wide gamut back to sRGB, and this clamping is decent, resulting in good overall colour accuracy for SDR and sRGB specific content. It's possible actually to improve the sRGB mode quite nicely with just a few simple tweaks to the on-screen menu and the RGB levels, and this performance shown here is now measured based purely on those adjusted settings, improving colour accuracy for SDR content nicely as well. We also calibrated the screen in the Gamer 1 mode with the full wide native gamut, with the ICC profile making corrections to the gamma curve and mapping the native gamut back to sRGB for colour aware applications. You can find a link below to our best settings guide and calibrated ICC profile for this screen if you want to try them out. Despite this being firmly aimed at gamers, LG have continued to incorporate their hardware calibration feature on this model as well, a feature that we've seen on other recent monitors in their range, offering two modes which can be calibrated at a hardware level. That's a pretty unique feature to LG monitors in the consumer space at the moment, and it allows you to calibrate the screen's internal lookup table for improved levels of accuracy and flexibility. This is also useful as you don't need to worry about which applications can use an ICC profile, with the calibration being carried over to all applications and uses, including gaming and videos too, as it's stored in the monitor itself. Away from gaming, the screen is far more limited, both in panel capabilities and in monitor feature set. Clearly this is a small size screen by today's standards, and it's got a low resolution which doesn't give you much desktop space for use with office applications and multitasking and so on. Its 90 ppi pixel density is also low, but since it's an LCD panel, it's got a normal subpixel arrangement and still provides a fairly sharp image. A 27-inch 1440p monitor would give you a significant upgrade here though as well, as would ultra-wide and obviously 4K and 5K resolution monitors that are available on the market. But these aren't the kind of uses you'd be buying this 1000Hz gaming monitor for really. If you need it to be able to handle some light office work and browsing alongside your gaming, it can handle that fine. There's a nice stable image and wide viewing angles thanks to the IPS panel. You don't have to put up with the restricted viewing angles and loads of noticeable gamma and colour tone shift like you do on competing TN film LCD panels. The wide colour gamut is also capable of supporting a more vivid and colourful image than common sRGB only gaming monitors. In fact, this IPS panel is especially good when it comes to viewing angles, as the panel features an ATW polarizer, which reduces off-angle IPS glow and improves black depth and contrast when viewed from an angle very well. It's great to see this included here as well actually. There's a light matte anti-glare coating which provides good reflection and glare handling, along with low levels of grain on par with other modern IPS LCD panels. Feature-wise, the screen is very limited given the target market, with no USB data ports, no speakers, KVM switch or other modern features that you might find on some high-end gaming screens. There is a USB-C port on the back, but that's only for an upstream connection back to your PC to support things like hardware calibration and firmware updates and so on. It can't be used for DP alt mode, unfortunately. There's a 4-pole headphone and mic jack, which could be useful for some people, but we'd have liked to have seen at least a couple of USB data ports added on the back of the screen at least. These features have been left off though, since this is firmly aimed at competitive gamers. If you want something more versatile for office and general uses with other modern features, then you should probably look elsewhere. We were surprised by the UltraGear 25G590B, to be honest. We came in expecting the worst from this new 1000Hz wave of LCD monitors, but actually we thought it performed really well. While pixel response times can't reach fast enough to fully keep up with the maximum frame rate, and smearing is then introduced as a result in the fastest moving content, the motion clarity remains excellent overall. This is a limitation of IPS LCD technology overall, and LG have done a very good job optimizing the response times as best they can though. Alongside that, you've got small additional incremental benefits that, while they might not be relevant to your average gamer, could matter for the professional and esports market where this screen is really aimed. MBR mode worked well, input lag was super low, and the screen size and resolution are very popular for these type of gamers. I'm trying to consider everything here in context relative to the target market. Clearly, the screen is small by today's standards, with a low resolution, it's got a limited feature set and connectivity, and it's lacking features that you'd see on other modern monitors, which are aimed more, I suppose, at hybrid uses. The feature set has been trimmed back given its target market, which is to be expected, but it was nice to see DP 2.1, hardware calibration even, and an ATW polarizer included here. LG tell us that pre-orders are due to commence from the 30th of July 2026 in many regions, including the US and the UK, at the pricing shown here. That's including the US price of $999 US. That's clearly a high price point, but it's on par with other popular esports screens from the likes of BenQ and Asus, so not really a surprise. Hopefully, this detailed technical review has helped you consider and decide whether this new screen is the right one for you or not. Do let us know in the comments section below if this is the monitor that you've got your eyes on, or if you're looking at something else, maybe one of the other 1000Hz monitors that are coming out. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you next time.